In the year 1928, a boy was born into a small Turkish family who soon after fled the country and relocated to the town of Pontiac, Michigan. The boy was raised by strict parents who encouraged academic success, overachievement, and religious exposure. The man made regular visits to terminally ill patients, photographing their eyes in an attempt to pinpoint the exact moment of death. He believed that doctors could use this information to distinguish death from fainting, shock, or coma in order to learn when resuscitation was useless. He later stated that his number one reason for doing this was because it was interesting. Throughout the next several decades, the man traveled throughout the country as a result of steady unemployment due to his perceived sickening fascination with death. In 1986, he settled back in Michigan and became inspired by an article from the Netherlands that detailed the idea of lethal injection. Shortly after, the man proposed several ideas that would allow physician-assisted suicide with the use of his self-made machine called the Thantron, which translated into instrument of death in Greek. The machine would first inject a saline solution, followed by painkillers, and finally a lethal dose of potassium chloride. In 1990, the man used the machine for the first time on an Alzheimer patient and continued to use the practice on many others. He rose to fame for his practices in physician-assisted suicide and was later convicted and spent 8 years in prison for his involvement. This man, of course, is Dr. Jack Kevorkian, or Dr. Death. For the people who face the cruel reality of a debilitating and terminal illness, it is vital that they be given the right to choose their own fate. Though Dr. Jack Kevorkian is perhaps the best-known physician involved in the earliest debates of physician-assisted suicide, the matter has grown far past any of the early assumptions that were formed and carried out in earlier years. Physician-assisted suicide is the idea that any terminally ill patient can seek services from a physician with the intentions of ending their life. In recent years, this matter has become especially important and therefore controversial. The statistics for terminal illnesses such as cancer have skyrocketed and created more of a precedent for the debate to reignite. There are many components of this practice, which is what makes it so very difficult to ethically determine what is right for our society. After reviewing several articles, it seems that there is a clear divide between the opposing side of physicians who have become involved themselves in the debate against physician-assisted suicide. To look at the debate more closely, it is important to consider why physician-assisted suicide is being considered in the first place. The option to utilize the practice of physician-assisted suicide is intended to target the percentage of the population who are living with terminal illness. The assumed intention of this practice is to give people who are living with terminal illness the choice to live in excruciating pain and debilitation or to end your life and die with dignity. On a smaller scale, if you look exclusively at the portrait painted above, it does not appear that there is much room for debate. After all, it is a choice, not a standard. However, there are many other factors to consider when you look at this in the big picture, to include the perspective of non-medical professionals, the perspective of medical professionals who will be physically carrying out the practice, and of course, the patient. From the non-medical professional standpoint, when considering the statistics of who carry out physician-assisted suicide, it is important to notice what appears to be a trend with the situation of the people who do choose physician-assisted suicide. While the keynote above is that people who use this method to end physical pain, some of the other statistics point otherwise. According to Oregon's Public Health Department, the top reasons people choose to use assisted suicide in the state are ones who are losing autonomy, which is 91.5%. Or the decreasing ability to engage in enjoyable activities, which is 88.7%, losing dignity, 79.3%, losing control of your body, 50.1%, and becoming a burden on others, 40%. Only 23% named physical pain or fear of possible physical pain as a reason. From observing these statistics, it may be fair to conclude that there are two very separate questions that may fuel the controversy on this topic. Both questions appear to be very different in nature, debate, and outcome. Question number one, is it ethical to seek the practice of physician-assisted suicide as a means of ending your life to avoid possible or ongoing physical pain and or physical decompensation? Yes, it is ethical to be provided an option to end your suffering and your experience if there is no foreseeable possibility for change and or improvement. Number two, is it ethical to seek the practice of physician-assisted suicide as a means of ending your life to avoid embarrassment, hindrance of daily activities, and inconvenience to family members and workers who may be asked to work with you. In this matter, it becomes far less clear. Pain and suffering is one topic, but this topic could be applied to situations where you get stabbed in the eye by a sharp fork and your family has to change your bandages regularly and you aren't happy with the results of being blind. In this instance, no, it's not ethical, in my opinion. To further complicate the ethical considerations of this matter, it is also vital to review this debate from the side of the medical professionals. Recently, the New England Journal of Medicine published an article with a posed vignette detailing the case of a 72-year-old man with metastatic pancreatic cancer. He receives chemotherapy for his cancer, which has resulted in him becoming jaundiced, losing his appetite, and experiencing severe abdominal pain. To ease the pain, he receives narcotics, which causes him to experience constipation. The man has been married for 51 years and has a close family. With the fear of living a pain-stricken life and imposing inconvenience on his family, he asks his treatment team to provide him with information on physician-assisted suicide. The New England Journal of Medicine asked for a response on each perspective from a physician or team of physicians. The pro side of the physician-assisted suicide, Dr. Nicola Biller-Adorno, based her response on the idea that the opportunity to ask a competent professional for assistance in ending their lives in a legally and socially accepted way would be a clear improvement. He also explained the role of the physician and how it is not simply to preserve life, but also to apply expertise and skills to improve their patient's health or alleviate their suffering. The latter includes providing comfort and support to dying patients. Such patients may, after careful consideration, come to the conclusion that in their particular situation, asking a physician for assistance in suicide best reflects their interests and preferences. On the opposing side, Dr. Donald Boudreau and Dr. Margaret Somerville defend their stance on the topic based on the ethics that they are expected to uphold as physicians. The pair of physicians first validate the struggle of the patient, but further explain that the concept of physicians practicing the art of healing and further describe the topic of physician-assisted suicide as being part of that slippery slope due to what they consider to be an unavoidable outcome of the practice becoming too comfortable and therefore abused. So in the mindset of a physician, your first commitment is to do no harm. And by assisting in physician-assisted suicide, you are, in essence, harming a patient as you are murdering them. So their standpoint on this is, how are you still a physician practicing within your ethics if this is a standard that you're choosing to practice with? And at that point, when does the line get drawn between what is acceptable and what is not acceptable? As mentioned, what appears to be the most compelling piece of their defense is the principle of ethics involved. More specifically, the team of doctors seem to experience the most difficulty with the idea of death as a means of treatment. Despite the great debate that has continued for decades and will likely continue for eternity, 5 states within the United States have legalized some form of physician-assisted suicide. These states include Oregon, Washington, California, Vermont, and Montana. Montana actually considers this method only when ruled in a court of law. There have been several instances in which patients have relocated to become residents in one of the states listed above in order to carry out their wishes to receive physician-assisted suicide. Of all perspectives, it appears to be the most important to consider the feelings of the patient. As detailed above in the case vignette from the New England Journal of Medicine, the patient, who is considered to be elderly and considered his quality of life to be poor and declining, had opted for this. His consideration for physician-assisted suicide was formed by his personal feelings toward his quality of life and the guilt of burdening his family and the people responsible for taking care of him while his disease ultimately worsened. In this case, how can one say that they could ethically refuse this man his choice to pursue alternate methods of treatment? When the bill was proposed in California by Governor Jerry Brown, he released the following statement: "I do not know what I would do if I were dying in prolonged and excruciating pain. I am certain, however, that it would be a comfort to be able to consider the options afforded by this bill, and I would not deny that right to others." This topic has gained far more attention in recent years. For instance, books and film adaptations such as the movie Me Before You and After You detail the life of a remarkable, driven young man who had the earth at his fingertips as a professional in the investment industry. He had one heck of a life until he was one day struck unexpectedly by a motorcycle as he was crossing the street. The accident left him a quadriplegic. He battles serious depression and becomes a recluse. He even attempts to take his own life due to feeling that he's a burden to his family and that his life will never improve or even be a quarter of what it was prior to his accident. He eventually travels to Switzerland and enlists the help of physician-assisted suicide. The book details the experiences of those who love him leading up to the act and following his death. Like any death, they grieve and they mourn, but they also feel inadequate because they felt that he wanted to leave and that they weren't enough. In this case, the perspective of the patient was that he felt loved, and he did love, but that he couldn't accept that his life was no longer what he wished for, and he was in pain. He could no longer smoke a cigar at his favorite place in Paris or ski the Swiss Alps. He wasn't going to go through a phase of just feeling blue. This was his life now. It is easy to look at this situation and think that he had everything going on for him despite his disabilities, like being handsome and filthy rich. But his life just wasn't ever going to be something that he felt he could truly live anymore. In closing, I, like Governor Brown, endorse the opportunity of choice. Although this method may or may not be ideal for me on a personal level, I am not in a position to choose what is right for the multitude of people in this country who suffer without fair choice. Though many other considerations are available in the assistance of this debate, such as health insurance and the right to coverage for drugs, or the eligibility or ineligibility to collect life insurance after choosing physician-assisted suicide, I feel that ethical considerations of whether it would or would not be legal or illegal come first and foremost. Americans pride themselves on being free in spirit and open in mind. Death is inevitable. It is something that is guaranteed from the moment that our hearts start beating. However, most people picture their deaths as something that take place in the warmness of old age or the tragedy of an unexpected accident. Instead of focusing on the times when we have zero control, we must empower ourselves to respectfully advocate for the people that may be in a position to take control of what they are most certainly entitled to, their life and their death.